Alright, so hey everyone. Today I want to take a look at the Deadzones for Dragonball Raging Blast 1 and 2. This is being demonstrated on the Xbox 360. And to start with the movement, we have a very large 60% square Deadzone. And because of the shape, it's larger in the corners. There's also an additional underlying axial Deadzone, and this causes 20% around each axis to be restricted. In those cases, you'll be moving in one of four directions. In this case, perfectly left, perfectly right, perfectly forward, and perfectly backward. You only start seeing diagonal movement when you break out of both axis Deadzones, which is marked by the green region, and you can see this with the subtle changes in Goku's animation. But this is most clear when just getting up in Vegeta's face and passing the thresholds, because you'll be able to pretty clearly see Goku rotating around him. The shaded region represents the dash threshold, so you can see here, moving pretty slow, but once I pass in the shaded region, you start dashing. The threshold for this is a rounded square, and most of the diagonal threshold is beyond this graph, so I'll show the dot graph. Once you begin dashing, you can't return to your slower movement. You have to fall under the Deadzone to reset it. So moving to the next Deadzone, I'm going to cover the charge attack directions. So you can charge attack in 5 directions, forward, left and right, and up and down. And if you're anywhere within the Deadzone, you'll be attacking forward. If you point horizontally, but are under 60%, then you'll attack horizontally. So left, right, here's down, here's up. These thresholds do go off this graph slightly and move into a strong diagonal, but given how wide the range is, this really isn't going to be noticeable at all, but there is a slight vertical bias here for those directions. And moving to the right stick, this controls your super attacks, and this functions pretty much similarly, where see that once you pass this threshold, use Solar Flare in that case, use your right special here, and there's still a vertical bias here, so if we use Solar Flare again, if you stay in one of these regions, it doesn't just keep using it once your cooldown time is over, but you can see when I move up to 60%, I use the up special, which is his Kamehameha, but you can see these dotted thresholds here, and if you're within the Deadzone, moving horizontally 60% will trigger your horizontal ones, but if you're up above or below 60% vertically, you'll instead just re-trigger the up or down super attacks. So there's still vertical bias here, but again, these ranges are so wide that you'll never notice those specifics of that, and there's absolutely no point to keeping your stick pushed in any part of full tilt anyway with this after the attack is triggered. So that about covers it for the gameplay Deadzones. There is one more Deadzone in this game, and that's for the loaded screen minigame where you play as the Nimbus and just collect some capsules. And that appears to use just a 20% axial Deadzone. That's just a minigame, so nothing really important there. But we'll move on to Raging Blast 2 now. Alright, so we're in Raging Blast 2, and for the Movement Deadzone, it's still a 60% size, but the shape, instead of a perfect square, we now have sort of a bloated square shape. And I'll cover why that shape might be in just a little bit. But of course the Deadzone's still a little larger in the corners, but overall smaller because the corners aren't as dramatic as they were in the first game. But we don't have any underlying axial Deadzone unlike the first game, so you have full diagonal movement, and this will transition when moving right around the axis. And of course we can do what we did in the first game and get in Vegeta's face, and you can see that Goku will switch directions right across the axis instead of needing to push 20% around it to do so. And the shaded region again represents the dash threshold, but this time it's perfectly circular, and this is because there isn't the axial Deadzone to warp it into its square shape, so this can be represented completely on this graph. Part of the reason for the shape seems to be in Raging Blast 1 there was the underlying axial Deadzone, and then there was a square Deadzone on top of that, and those square Deadzones are normally checking the absolute value of X or Y passing the Deadzone, and that creates that shape without limiting additional diagonal movement. Here, we likely have, instead of an axial Deadzone, an underlying radial Deadzone, and then that same square calculation is being set up on top of that with the scaled radial values, and the output radial values are warped, so flat thresholds are warped around this, so you can see that this is what 60% would be in the output, and we can see this full range applied with the charge attacks and the super attacks. So that's just an interesting bit of how the math for that can work out. But we're going to jump into the charge attacks like we did before. So again, if you're within the Deadzone, you just use a forward smash, and if you're horizontally but under, in this case about probably 50%, you and of course the threshold's warped, so it's not exactly that, but you use your horizontal smashes, but if you're above this, you use your vertical ones. So there's still a vertical bias here, and perhaps even greater because this goes below where it did in the first game. But again, these thresholds are so wide, these differences aren't going to be noticeable at all during general gameplay. So again, the super attacks are very similar, and you can see if I move to the left, we get the solar flare again. If we move up, we get the Kamehameha, and if we move in this range, again, it doesn't auto queue the attack if you're already passed it. But if we move past the vertical range, we use our vertical super. But the difference here is that these horizontal thresholds, when you're beyond vertically, the dead zone in the first game would reuse your up or down super, but here they instead use your horizontal attacks. So in this game, there's no bias towards your vertical supers, but again, these thresholds are so wide, these aren't going to be noticed by anyone during normal gameplay. So that covers the dead zones for both of these games. At this point, I just want to ramble a bit about some of the specifics in relation to Sparking Zero, which is coming out shortly. But talking here, as I mentioned, with the dashing, you can't stop dashing until you fall under the dead zone, and then you can move to the slower speed. I think it would be nice if you fell out of this threshold, if you could move to the slower speed, one, just for some additional movement control, but part of the reason, because when you're moving slowly, you can use your directional charge attacks, whereas once you move into the dash region, you have to use your dash smash. And I think if you're moving around, it would be nice to be able to switch between these without having to stop completely to do that. As far as general gameplay benefits for that, it's a nice option, but say, for example, in Tenkaichi 3, even for players using Dragon Dash canceling into perfect smashes, they would just default to the forward smash, just because it was more straightforward. But in Tenkaichi 3, it was actually a little easier because your dashing wasn't based on stick distance. It had a discrete button to be able to dash. But so that just covers that aspect. The other one is, I think the full diagonal movement in Raging Blast 2 is really nice for general movement. For Sparking Zero, it would depend on if they carry through some of the dragon canceling maneuvers from Tenkaichi 3. For those, some axial restriction would make sense because you can flank an opponent by flying straight over them, and it may be more beneficial to be able to fly perfectly straight so you don't waste any momentum accidentally moving diagonally. If they don't carry that, then full diagonal movement I think is preferable. But we'll have to see when the game releases. Otherwise, 60% is a colossal dead zone size. With the dead zone size like this, you really don't have to worry about anyone's stick leaning dramatically. But I think just reducing this to, say, 30 or even 40% would be make the controls feel quite a bit more responsive, while still avoiding drift for most players. But I think that about covers things. So thanks for watching, and everyone, have a great rest of your day.
Let's try that! Here goes! You're kidding! Take that! Here goes! Yes, it's hard, but you're a fighting genius, Catwalt. You've always learned faster than I do. No matter how hard I tried, it never changed. That's why I decided to do this. I get it. You let Robin eat. Go. Oh.